This is Angela from the cultural domain, Angela Bisa from EDUCULT in Austria. I'll present what we did in the literature, so what we'll present now together with my colleagues from IADT. My colleague Perek is the gaps in terms of impact assessments that we identified in the literature, in the academic literature, as well as in the policies analyzed. I will therefore share my screen. Let me see if it works.
Yes.
So I think this part that we summarized adds up very well to what Annalisa just said and to the tone she said. So I think I will just go through these points we presented. The first being more on discourses, on discussions that kind of shaped literature, academic literature on cultural heritage in the last years. And then the second point will be the gaps, and then Perek will present shortly also on gaps in the policy domain. So the title, what you see here, Impact of Cultural Heritage on Culture, was kind of the task of the literature review that we did in the first part of this project. We tried to assess the relationship and the effects of cultural heritage on culture, on cultural values, and on the cultural domain. And by defining the task like this, you can already see the difficulty of distinguishing kind of cause and effect. Adding also to this point of the causality link that Annalisa highlighted. However, also this difficulty points at the main issue that is leading academic literature already since years, namely the relevance of cultural heritage for the culture of a group, of a community. In the last 20 years, let's say, the critical heritage studies was a tradition or a theoretical school that kind of highlighted the reconstruction of the very notion of what cultural heritage is, and highlighted it as an inherently dissonant social construct. So the critical heritage studies considered heritage to be dynamic, cultural process that constructs the memory, the identity, the history of a community, and was therefore, let's say, in a tradition of a social constructive tradition in social science. And this here also emphasizes so the critical heritage studies, but also the general social constructive tradition in social science. They highlight, of course, the relevance of discourses and narratives also in cultural heritage. This is one part of one maybe also gap that we will later come to. The discussion of discourse and narratives are very difficult to grasp, obviously, through impact assessments. The next point are discussions on the importance of cultural values. When understanding cultural heritage is relevant in constructing communities, their identity, place, and memory, the impact on the values of the community are, of course, crucial. And the concept of values has been increasingly located at the heart of the theoretical discourse on heritage, with social value becoming even more important and more relevant in the last years. And there's been various definitions of cultural values by Labadi, by Throsby, by UK Demos. Also, I think the Cultural Heritage Council for Europe report presents a definition, and it shows that the term of values need to be defined and deconstructed in order to apply it for assessing an impact of cultural heritage. And last but not least, also adding to what has been said before, the literature in the field on culture and cultural heritage, of course, identifies participation in cultural heritage as very important and has been emphasized. But what I would like to highlight also here is that not only the importance of people participating and accessing cultural heritage sites and cultural heritage in general has been highlighted, but also deficit models in participation, and that there is a danger, of course, obviously, if participation is only used as a word and is not implemented. So I come to the gaps or points of gaps in the current level of impact assessment that are identified in the literature. So adding to these discussions that I highlighted in the slide before, recent academic literature suggests that heritage interventions must be more cognizant of conflicting interpretations of history and of effects of intervention on identity, memory, and communities. So there must be a way to grab these conflicting interpretations. There's been different studies by Lehrer, by Whiting, who tried to see how it is possible to grasp these different understandings of narratives, different understandings of discourses. Adding to this, studies also identified a gap in understanding and assessing the impact of cultural heritage on the cultural values, and especially on the cultural values of local populations. Lombardi had an interesting study, and she demonstrated how within the process of proposing heritage sites for UNESCO, for the UNESCO list, specific themes and groups of the population as well as their histories and values have been excluded. So this including all different interpretation of or conflicting interpretations would therefore be a part. And then I come to the third point. Similarly, you argued that the UNESCO approach that considers communities as a bearer of their own specific heritage, as well as a bearer of common heritage, no matter what political relationship with states is, ignores the sensitive nature of local cultures with the state, with other cultures. So somehow this is all part of the same thing, but or different different aspects of a similar approach. And this approach maybe can be also summarized in this term authorized heritage discourse, because this has been a term and a discussion that has been leading cultural heritage literature, academic literature in the last years a lot, and it's basically it identifies a need for impact assessment that take into account authorized heritage discourses being discourses of an authority. So basically maybe a state, maybe the EU, and under it or behind it, various other discourses and their relationships. So my last point would be that in the context of all these gaps and points, of course, relations to issues of globalization, migration, and population are not yet grasped in current impact assessment models. So in this whole question of how to grasp those discourses, how to grasp narratives, conflicting ones, and so on, the question, of course, is also what Annalisa Zerkia said now, how globalization, migration, and populism, and also questions of racism, nationalism can be grasped by evaluation methods. And then I can, Perek, my colleague, will now present also gaps that have been identified mainly in the policy area.
Good morning, everyone. I'm actually presenting policy reflections in culture, but that work was mainly undertaken by EMA, the European Museum Academy. So I hope I do them justice in my reflections. So EU heritage policy supports shared European identity through a cultural heritage based on shared values and history. So there's a huge emphasis on the shared value, but also the shared responsibility. And it acknowledges the multiple narratives that exist under the European umbrella. It's clear that policy now appears as a cross-cutting policy or domain that cuts across beyond culture policy across activities such as regional development, cohesion, agriculture, environment, energy, climate change, tourism, education, etc. It's almost everywhere, or has an impact or has potential impacts in those ways. There's an increasing importance given to cultural statistics in the evaluation of economic and social impacts of cultural heritage to demonstrate added value and feeding back to policymakers making decisions. However, there's a lack of comparability of assessment data because of the many variations of approaches and methods applied. So there's a need for better quality research data to inform future policy. Converging policies around protection and use valorization presents a policy challenge, as well as accommodating the diversity of multiple narratives, as mentioned earlier, that exist under the European dimension. OECD policies lean towards strengthening tourism economies, but in line with sustainable development, which is a more recent addition. However, environmental and social considerations need to be mainstreamed into the investment decision framework. Council of Europe offer the Faro Convention, which adopts a broad cross-disciplinary definition of cultural heritage that is strongly linked to living communities and to the environment. It recognises the individual as well as the collective rights to access and engage with cultural heritage. UNESCO, the recent actions show an attempt to improve the integration of culture within the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals framework, as well as developing better evidence-based and result-oriented monitoring, reporting and evaluation. So given all these things, given the increased cross-cutting dimensions of recent heritage and development policies in the EU and internationally, the opportunity is clear for a holistic model of assessment to assess the quality of cultural heritage interventions in all areas of sustainable development, including the domains of our recognized in our project of cultural, economic, social and environmental. Thank you.